We would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we meet to share these conversations on the Vegan Compass podcast.
We extend our respect to elders past and present, as well as any of our listeners and guests. Hello and welcome to the Vegan Compass podcast, unveiling truths, inspiring change. We are your hosts, Rick Allport and Mackenzie Cross.
From wherever you're listening, please be sure to like and subscribe to support this podcast. Now to the episode.
Hi everyone, and welcome to News of the Week on the Vegan Compass podcast. We're so glad you could join us for another episode where we shine a light on the news headlines that matter. I'm Rick Allport.
And I'm Mackenzie Cross. Today we've got quite the lineup, 8 stories in total. We'll be talking about some tough headlines that highlight the shocking mistreatment of sentient beings, as well as some encouraging developments in vegan food innovation and compassionate action.
Exactly. We believe it's important to examine every angle, holding people accountable when animals are harmed, and applauding the good news that shows we're moving toward a kinder, more conscious world.
That's right. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Let's get into it.
Our first story is truly distressing. It comes from Sydney's eastern suburbs, where a man has been arrested after allegedly harming 2 native birds, both long-billed corellas. Police reports say he used fishing line to catch these poor animals, put them into a suitcase, and even shook the suitcase, which resulted in their injuries.
It's heartbreaking to think about these sensitive birds being treated so callously. Corellas are incredibly social, intelligent creatures. They feel pain and fear just like we do. Thankfully, they're now in a stable condition after undergoing treatment at a Sydney vet.
That's good to hear, Mackenzie. The man has been charged with cruelty and harming a protected animal. There's a court appearance set, so we'll see where the legal process leads. But from an animal rights perspective, it's important that the law takes these acts seriously. This isn't just about one case. It's about sending a message that animal cruelty is absolutely unacceptable.
Exactly. We want to see our legal system step in firmly because these birds deserve compassion and respect. When cruelty happens, the consequences should reflect the severity of the act.
The next story might sound amusing at first. However, in reality, it is far from amusing. We're heading to the US, where a 4-month-old kangaroo in a diaper was spotted hopping past a Florida elementary school. Social media had a field day with the jokes, and this highlights the fact that so many people think that keeping wild animals as pets is fine.
But here's the serious side. Kangaroos are wild animals native to Australia, and they shouldn't be relocated or kept in confinement outside of their natural habitat. It's actually a form of animal cruelty. These animals need wide open spaces and specific environmental conditions that Florida just can't provide.
While we can understand why this site caused such a stir, especially on social media, this isn't a situation we should encourage or celebrate. It's an unfortunate reminder that people sometimes forget wildlife aren't cute novelty pets. They're sentient creatures that require proper care and freedom.
That's the crux of it, Rick. Thankfully, it seems law enforcement quickly stepped in and returned the kangaroo to its owner. But that shouldn't overshadow the fact that this animal shouldn't have been in that environment to begin with. Wild animals being kept as pets, particularly in places they don't belong, is problematic for both the animals and the community.
Moving on to a bit of good news for all of us who are vegan or looking to cut back on animal products. Researchers in Canada are hard at work creating plant-based cheeses that stretch, melt, and taste just like traditional dairy cheese, but with healthier and more sustainable ingredients.
Exactly, and that's the holy grail for a lot of people who've tried to give up dairy. The idea of a truly delicious plant-based cheese that still melts on your pizza or stretches in a toasted sandwich will help a lot of people to make the switch to 100% plant-based.
Right now, these researchers are testing out various plant proteins, like pea protein, and combining them with oil blends to mimic that signature creaminess of cheese. One particularly promising combination has been 25% coconut oil with 75% sunflower oil. This blend helps reduce saturated fat while still maintaining the melt and stretch.
And that's a win for our health as well as for the animals. If they are able to replicate the taste and texture of cheese without involving dairy cows at all, it'll be a major step forward. It's exciting times for innovation in vegan food.
Mackenzie, here is some groundbreaking news from the plant-based food scene. Researchers at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem have developed an innovative method to craft plant-based whole cuts of meat like steaks and chops using a technology known as injection molding.
Injection molding. That's typically something we hear about in plastic manufacturing, but now these engineers are using it to replicate the structure of real muscle and fat with remarkable accuracy. And guess what? Their taste tests showed people couldn't tell the difference from actual meat.
Quite amazing, Mackenzie. By tapping into metamaterials, where the shape and structure matter as much as the ingredients, they can mimic everything from a steak's fibrous texture to the way fat behaves during cooking. And the best part? It's scalable and cost-effective, a huge win for making animal-free meat more widely available.
The environmental implications alone are enormous. If we shift to these plant-based alternatives for steaks, chops, and even seafood analogues, we're talking about a significant reduction in greenhouse gas emissions and water use, plus no animals suffer, which is a game changer for those of us focused on animal rights.
And the fact that it's a partnership across communities, Israeli and Palestinian scientists, makes the story even more inspiring. It shows how collaboration can spark real innovation and, in this case, help build a sustainable and compassionate future for all beings.
Absolutely, Rick. This is yet another example of how food technology is rapidly evolving, and it's great news for anyone who's ready to swap out animal products without giving up those beloved textures and flavors. It's definitely a story to watch as it continues to develop.
Our next story takes us to Tennyson Beach in Adelaide, South Australia, where a short-tailed stingray, an impressive 2 meters across, was found dead after being illegally caught and left on the sand. The stingray's barb had been removed, and the hook was still in its mouth, which strongly suggests it was subjected to a cruel and careless act. It's a stark reminder that fishing can be anything but harmless, especially when people treat these creatures like disposable objects instead of sentient beings.
This is really upsetting, Rick. These stingrays are not only beautiful, sentient creatures, but they're also a draw card for tourism in the area. The beach community loves them and sees them as an integral part of their coastal environment. Finding one treated so cruelly, especially a fully grown breeding ray, definitely crosses a line.
Precisely, and it's disturbing how often the suffering of fish and other marine life is overlooked. We treat cats and dogs with respect and legal protections, yet marine animals are routinely subjected to hooks, nets, and brutal handling, often with very few repercussions. In South Australia, fish aren't even covered by the same animal welfare legislation that protects many land animals. That needs to change. The idea that it's just fishing glosses over the real, tangible suffering inflicted on these animals. New legislation aims to prevent cruel practices like harvesting tails and fins. That could mean tough penalties, fines up to $250,000 and up to 10 years in jail if people are caught.
But in this case, officials say there's no concrete evidence of a crime because it appears someone tried to release the ray. Many locals remain skeptical though, given the stingray's injuries. Regardless, the lack of legal protection for fish and rays in South Australia is pretty alarming, especially compared to other Australian states.
Exactly. It's time we acknowledge that cruelty in fishing is still cruelty, regardless of whether it's happening on land or at sea. If someone accidentally catches a stingray, they must remove the hook and release it immediately, without dragging it onto the beach. That should be the bare minimum standard. Treating these magnificent animals with respect, rather than as disposable trophies, must become the norm. Otherwise, we'll keep seeing tragedies like this, and our oceans will be all the poorer for it.
Very true, Rick. We need those laws, and we need the public to know how to treat marine life ethically. These creatures shouldn't just be seen as catch of the day or a nuisance. They're living beings who deserve our respect and protection.
Our sixth story dives into a very confronting protest at the Victorian state government offices in Australia. Members of Farm Transparency Project stage a thought-provoking demonstration by placing the bodies of deceased piglets on a white sheet outside Treasury Place. This was their way of drawing attention to the harsh, inhumane conditions in Victorian pig farms.
This protest isn't just about a single incident. According to the activists, dozens of them visited 20 different piggeries over the weekend, documenting what they call filthy conditions. They allege they found sick and injured piglets, sows in cramped stalls with infected sores, and tragically, the bodies of young pigs who didn't survive. These are the very animals they placed at the government building, an extremely visceral display intended to make the suffering impossible to ignore.
The Victorian government has recently stated its in-principle support of measures like phasing out gas stunning, where pigs are rendered unconscious with carbon dioxide, and putting CCTV cameras in abattoirs, presumably to increase transparency and accountability. However, these measures are contingent upon broader national agreements and viable commercial alternatives, which leaves activists frustrated. They see this as bureaucratic foot-dragging, especially given these urgent welfare concerns.
It sure seems that way, Rick. Farm Transparency Project and other animal rights groups argue that half measures and in-principle endorsements don't help pigs right now. They want an immediate ban on practices like sow stalls, farrowing crates, and gas chambers, methods they deem outdated and cruel. These activists stress that the government has heard testimony and reviewed footage showing suffering, yet they feel officials have done little to actually change the laws or regulations surrounding pig farming.
It raises some tough questions for the public too. If people find these images upsetting, then it might be time to reconsider your consumption of pork products. Protests like this aim to shatter any complacency, forcing us all to confront the reality that animals are sentient beings who experience pain and distress.
Right, and at the end of the day, it's about accountability, both from the government and from consumers. We have the power to demand higher standards or to opt out of supporting these industries altogether by choosing a vegan lifestyle. The Farm Transparency Project's stark demonstration might be shocking, but sometimes that shock is necessary to propel real change.
All right, let's shift our focus to a story that emerged last December, but it's still incredibly relevant. A new report showing that factory farms cost UK taxpayers over £1.2 billion every year. This study, titled The Hidden Harms of Factory Farms, was put together by the Conservative Animal Welfare Foundation. It really highlights just how deeply subsidised these cruel systems are and how, contrary to popular belief, they don't actually bolster food security. In fact, any form of animal farming inherently leads to immense suffering and raises significant ethical questions we can't ignore.
It's a staggering figure, Rick, and what's more troubling is that around 85% of farming subsidies for chicken and pig farmers apparently end up going to factory farms, totaling about £269 million. So the idea that these operations provide cheap meat starts to look pretty shaky when you factor in the hidden costs to taxpayers, the environment, and the animals themselves.
Exactly. At the heart of it are living, sentient creatures confined in unnatural, often agonizing conditions, be it industrial or free range. Factory farms are just one extreme example of how deeply exploitative animal agriculture is. From the pollution they generate to the suffering they inflict, the entire model is fundamentally flawed. These new figures just lay bare how taxpayers end up footing the bill for a system built on cruelty.
This is a very important topic, Rick, and it turns out this is bigger than just one country too. Across Europe, the US, and the UK, these massive subsidies artificially lower the price of animal products. Meanwhile, small-scale farmers who might want to transition to more sustainable, humane practices are often left struggling to compete. The system is stacked in favour of these huge industrial operations.
And that's why the report calls for halting the expansion of new mega farms and restructuring subsidies to support kinder, more sustainable ways of producing food. But really, all animal farming comes at a huge cost, both to the animals' welfare and to the planet. If we are truly committed to meeting climate goals and respecting life, we need to challenge and ultimately move beyond these exploitative systems altogether.
And for those of us choosing plant-based foods, this story reinforces the idea that even your shopping habits are part of a bigger economic and social equation. By opting out of farmed animal products, you're taking a stand against taxpayer-funded cruelty and environmental harm. It's a reminder that every step we take toward compassionate, sustainable eating can make a difference.
And here we have a fantastic piece of uplifting news to wrap up our coverage. New research shows that plant-based diets are really gaining momentum in the UK. According to the Vegan Society, 3% of people now identify as either vegan or plant-based, and another 10% are actively eliminating or reducing animal products. London, the Southwest, and the Northeast are said to be hotspots for this plant-forward lifestyle.
Exciting, Rick. It's so encouraging to see this trend picking up steam, and the reasons behind it are truly heartening. Over half of the people surveyed said they're driven by animal welfare concerns, while the rest cite health and environmental benefits. These are such positive motivators, showing a real shift in how people weigh their choices against the impact on sentient beings and the planet.
And it's not just the younger generations, Mackenzie, though they are leading the charge. Women in particular are more likely than men to make this switch, and people under 44 are embracing plant-based diets at twice the rate of older demographics. But we're also seeing seniors in care homes going meat-free, which highlights that compassion and health consciousness can happen at any stage of life.
Absolutely. It's a wonderful reminder that we can all make changes, no matter our age or background. The Vegan Society even notes that around 1 million new people in the UK went vegan in 2023 alone, in line with record lows in meat consumption. That's a testament to how quickly public attitudes are evolving.
It really is. Plus, this growing interest in plant-based living supports companies and innovators who are investing in compassionate alternatives, whether that's new vegan cheeses, plant-based steaks, or other delicious meat-free options. As demand goes up, those options only get better and more accessible.
Very true. It's all part of a virtuous cycle. More interest leads to more innovation, which then brings even more people on board. With animal welfare, health, and environmental concerns driving this shift, I think we can safely say the future looks bright for compassionate eating in the UK, and that's a hopeful note for all of us.
Well, that about does it for this week's episode of the Vegan Compass podcast. We've covered some tough stories that highlight very real cruelty towards animals, but we've also heard about remarkable innovations and a growing movement toward a vegan world.
Absolutely. It can be heartbreaking to witness the injustice and suffering in these situations, but it's so important to remember that each of us can make a difference, whether it's through activism, support for new vegan technologies, or simply making compassionate choices at each mealtime.
Every time we opt for vegan products, we're showing that there's a demand for a kinder, more sustainable world. Those steps might seem small on their own, but together they add up to a powerful shift.
So let's keep that momentum going, everyone. Let's stay informed, continue speaking out against animal cruelty wherever it appears, and champion the progress that's happening everywhere. We're all part of this global movement toward a truly vegan world.
And with that, we say a heartfelt thank you for tuning in. Stay kind, stay curious, and keep using your voice and your plate to create a more compassionate future. We'll see you next time on the Vegan Compass podcast. Thanks for listening to the Vegan Compass podcast, unveiling truths, inspiring change.
Be sure to follow us on social media at @thevegancompass_podcast. See you next time.